back in 2022, we were just starting to come out of the pandemic for real, and I was finally starting to go outside for real. I turned 21 about a month after the lockdown was announced back in 2020, and I always felt like I was robbed of the big one, right? I was finally able to drink and buy alcohol on my own, but the context in which I would even want to do that just wasn't a thing anymore. We were all quarantined inside. And for the sake of not incriminating myself, I never had a sip of alcohol before the age of 21. So there was this kind of childish part of me that was chomping at the bit to do the whole go to bars, go to clubs thing. I cringe to even say that because in hindsight, it was kind of stupid to put so much stock into that. And honestly, now I realize that I wasn't really missing much. But the reality is that once 2022 hit and things were finally opening up again, I was all up in there, for lack of a better term. I was going out every weekend. I was trying to make up for the time that I felt I lost from the panty. And I think that's when my relationship with alcohol really started to change. Eventually, social situations that I used to think that I needed to be in to drink no longer felt like a requirement or a prerequisite. I was in a new city, so when I could just go to a bar by myself, or better yet, I could just save some money and buy a bottle of whiskey to sit by myself on the weekends because, the bar prices were unruly. I felt justified in doing so. But then the weekends turned into the weekdays, and the drinks to take the edge off turned into drinks that I would use to drown my thoughts. And that's when it started to become a problem. I've got plenty of stories from this chapter of my life that are honestly pretty funny because of the stupid things that I did when I was drunk. But no single moment led to my decision to quit. It was really sort of a culmination of things. A lot of people who know me personally might think that I quit alcohol sort of all of a sudden because from the outside looking in, I was kind of, just one day drinking and the next day I wasn't. But it was something that I was contemplating for about 6 months before I actually ended up deciding to quit. I've heard the term sober curious thrown around and used before, and I think that's a better description of where I was before I put the bottle down before 2022. And I want to clarify that this video isn't a video to try to persuade you to stop drinking, and it's definitely not to encourage you. But obviously I'm biased and I'll be speaking from that perspective. But above all, I just want to share the experiences and perspectives that I've had and some of the things that I've experienced on my sober journey that I wish I knew before deciding to quit alcohol. And I want to give you the information that you need to make that decision for yourself. The first thing that I want to address and talk about a little bit is the fact that you never fully silence the temptation. I feel like this is a pretty common misconception that a lot of people have about beating any kind of addiction. They think that once you hit a certain number of days clean, you grow wings or you start levitating or some shit. You see the same thing with people struggling with corn addiction or nofap, or people who are doing social media cleanses and think that, after 3 months of being on social media, they're going to be able to read minds or some shit like that. And full transparency, I thought the same thing at first. I thought that if I could beat the temptation for the first few months and exercise that willpower, eventually the temptation would just leave me alone and I wouldn't have to resist anymore because I wouldn't even get the urge in the first place. And that couldn't be further from the truth. To this day, over 3 years later, I still have moments where I think a drink would be nice. There might be certain environments where I meet people who don't know that I don't drink and they might offer me a drink. If I say yes, no one's gonna blink twice, right? No one's gonna know. But my thing is, and I'll probably make a separate video about this another time, abstinence is easier to me than moderation. If I just make it a part of my identity that this is not something I do anymore, the decision becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. I know what the answer is going to be every time, right? But if the line is blurry, it's easy to start falling back towards the version of me that I was trying to move away from. And even if no one knows, I know. and I start to develop this horrible reputation with myself, which in this case would probably make me want to drink even more. So with any addiction, especially with alcohol, you have to keep making the decision every day to go without it. It never fully becomes automatic, and the temptation will be there, but in my experience, you have so much evidence from the benefits of not doing that thing, not drinking the alcohol, that you'll be able to say no with your chest a little bit more when those situations arise. The second thing that I want to highlight and talk about is that you may feel physically and emotionally worse at first. I know this sounds counterintuitive considering that there's literally zero health benefits from drinking alcohol, although some people might argue for the social benefits. And this also might not be everyone's experience, it might have just been a me thing, but if I'm being honest, I felt like ass when I stopped drinking. And especially in some very specific scenarios, I really struggled to justify it because I felt so terrible. I used to think that I was sleeping better when I was drunk because I wouldn't even remember falling asleep. So when I tried to go to sleep throughout the week without any drinks in my system, it was the hardest thing ever because my mind just wouldn't turn off. It took me years to get over that, and I tried to attribute it to other things like my neighbors being too noisy or my neighborhood being too noisy or just not being tired enough. But I guess this was like maybe part of the withdrawal. I also felt emotionally worse because for the first time in a while, I actually have to feel my emotions, right? I can just drink them away or drown them out with alcohol. I had to feel the loneliness I felt after being in a new city for a year and not really knowing if anyone was really messing with me like that. I had to feel the feeling of insufficiency at the time because I was struggling with dating. The silver lining through all of this, though, and I don't want to be too much of a doomer, is that once I was able to find healthy ways to heal these wounds that I used to soak in alcohol, it all became much more sustainable and I felt a million times better. So there is another side to it, but initially you do feel a little bit worse and it takes some time to get over. The third thing I'm gonna talk about is the fact that a lot of people will respect your decision, but some people won't. And honestly, that's okay. I won't spend too much time on this because at the end of the day, there's not much you can do to control what other people think or value. But I think the biggest thing for me as far as having respect for people around me when I wasn't drinking and others were, was not shoving it in people's face. If I'm in a social situation where people are drinking, I just don't partake. No need to announce it, no need to make a big deal out of it. But considering how normalized it is to drink, people will typically ask me when I'm not, right? And the majority of the conversations that I had with people when they ask me why/if I don't drink will be a respectful one, even though they'll proceed to rip a shot right after, But then there's some people who will be like, nah, stop playing, like try to push the issue and still try to get me to drink. And again, you really can't control that, but I just try to be cognizant of how I show up in those situations. I'm never going to try to, convince anyone to stop drinking or make anyone feel lesser than for drinking, but I just try to set that boundary for myself and keep it pushing. So I think in those situations, recognize the people that will support you throughout this journey are going to do so regardless, and the other people are going to do so regardless, and there's not much you can do about it. The fourth thing that I wanted to talk about that I noticed after I stopped drinking was the fact that new bad habits pop up to sort of fill the void if you're not intentional. You sort of lose one addiction and just pick up another, right? I started indulging more in other substances. I started fiending for more girls, for more women, and I spent more time inside on social media on the nights that I didn't want to go out and be in an environment where alcohol was involved, right? And here's where your brain actually can work against you and can be really sinister. It'll try to convince you that it's all okay, right? It's okay to do this other drug because you don't drink anymore. You need something to take the edge off and make life feel more bearable. It's okay to start lusting after all these women because at least you're not doing it from this drunken mind state. It's okay to stay inside and not be social because the only alternative is going out and drinking, right? It's like I was playing an addiction whack-a-mole, and I was just speed running depression, trying to figure out what else to do with my time to not feel terrible, which contributed to my second point that I made, about feeling horrible and really struggling to kind of get over that initial feeling. Initially, I didn't put the pieces together that once I removed this habit from my life, I had to replace it with something else. And you might be thinking, damn, like this guy's a moron, of course. Like that's the most obvious shit ever. But as I alluded to, I didn't have a playbook back then, and I really just didn't know what to expect. Hence why I'm making this video for anyone who's in the same boat. The reality is that no healthy outlet is going to give you the exact same feeling as drinking or any addiction for that matter. And once I stopped trying to chase that exact feeling, I got much better at identifying other things that would actually bring me enjoyment and fill the gap with other habits to replace the habits that I went to drinking for. Again, simple but not easy. For example, instead of going out super late on Friday nights and waking up at 1 p.m. on Saturday hungover because I had nothing else going on, I would just stay in, right? But you might be thinking, doesn't that just mean, you're gonna stay up late at home doing whatever people do past 10 p.m. because, the freaks come out at night? And you'd be right. I started doing that. But what I ended up doing to sort of circumvent that new bad habit that I was picking up, I signed up for a Muay Thai gym, and I would go to a class on Saturday mornings, or still do actually, that makes me have something to look forward to the next day that I'm excited about and would disincentivize me from not getting enough sleep. Otherwise, I'm gonna get my ass kicked, right? So that's just one example, but I think this is something that's often overlooked and is critical to sort out from the start of the sober journey. And I wish I had done this a bit sooner before kind of cycling through a bunch of other addictions. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is probably the hardest pill to swallow, and that is that your thoughts get 10 times louder. The reason that I felt terrible, the reason the temptation didn't go away, the reason I started picking up all these other vices, the reason that I started leaning on alcohol in the first place was because I couldn't sit and listen to my thoughts unperturbed. That felt like prison to me. I think the reason I was so scared to just listen to my thoughts was because I knew that if I acknowledged all these things that were subpar about my life at the time, there was no longer an excuse. I couldn't hide behind the fact that I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what to tackle because my thoughts were screaming it in my face. I had to do something about it once I knew about it, and I just did not want to do that work. Even if you're not necessarily fighting demons to that extent, when you're in social settings, your thoughts will still be loud. You're going to be hyper aware, and you're going to realize how pointless a lot of the things you used to do while drinking were. You might even realize how disconnected you feel from quote unquote friends that you used to drink with, and you won't be able to quiet those thoughts. Some people might see this as a good thing, revealing the truth, quote unquote, and some might prefer to kind of just not think about that. But either way, you're going to be really honest with yourself, whether you like it or not, once those drinks aren't flowing and once those thoughts start flowing. And to be honest, it's still pretty uncomfortable for me. So I just want to reiterate that this video was not made with the intent of trying to convince you to stop drinking alcohol or try to sort of scare you away from going sober, right? It's not really trying to shift you one way or the other, but rather just giving you the information that you need to make this decision for yourself and giving you tips that I wish I had when I started my sober journey. If this video helped you at all, please don't forget to give it a like. It really helps to push it to the people that actually need it. And if you don't want to leave it up to the algorithm, you can actually share this video with someone that you think would actually benefit from hearing it. Comment and let me know what you think too. I'm curious how folks' relationships with alcohol have evolved in this generation in particular. I get the vibe that a lot of people aren't drinking as much as our parents and grandparents used to, and I'm curious as to why. Also, don't forget to hit subscribe. I'll be sharing tons of videos to help chronic overthinkers develop better habits, overcome toxic relationships, and develop better perspectives, all by sharing my own story and my perspective. You can follow me on all socials here, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.